G'day. Today we are going to look at functionalist theory. So this is our third out of the four theories. So you go to page 24 and 25 for this one. So functionalist theory was created by a French sociologist called Émile Durkheim. And his theory was, these functionalist theory, actually, on a side note, and interactionalist theory, these are what I call the more wishy-washy theories. Evolutionary theory and conflict theory is very structured in kind of how it happens, whereas these are a bit more up with the fairies, I guess you could say. So according to functionalist theory, elements of society are interdependent. So what this means is that they rely on each other to maintain balance. So each social institution at a micro, meso and macro level, they all work collaboratively to maintain social stability. So I want you to think of it like this image, and this is the best way to remember functionalist theory, is think of society like a big machine of cogs. So you've got the big macro level changes, or macro level institutions, sorry. You might even want to label this, so that's probably a good idea. You can write macro, macro, macro in these circles. So you've got macro level institutions that are the main pillars of society. But for those main pillars of society to turn effectively, they need meso level institutions surrounding them that we can see here. And then for those to spin and turn effectively, we need the micro level institutions, the small little ones that we can see here. So the idea is that society is like one big cog, and they all need to work together to keep society ticking and turning along. If one cog gets removed, we can see that it can affect how other cogs and different parts of institutions within society at a meso or micro level or macro level, depending on the cog that gets removed, might create social change. So according to this theory, any change that happens is gradual, and it occurs when new institutions arise or old institutions fail or existing institutions change to compensate. So for that reason, we coined this direction of change as evolutionary. So any change that happens has to be very slow and gradual, because you can imagine if you just start transformatively putting different cogs in, you might jam the machine and it might break, is sort of the idea. So anything that happens is very slow. So social norms, values, and institutions are the rules that create and govern life. That society is ordered and must be balanced by social norms, values, and institutions. So an example, I guess you could say, of change with functionalist theory is the increased role of women in the workforce, for example. It's a change that has happened very slowly over time, and it's becoming a bigger cog the more that time goes on. Okay, so that would be an example of functionalist theory, and the idea is that each of these cogs have a function, or they all have a role to play. And so the idea that women being in the workforce nowadays, according to this theory, is to perform a new function to help the machine keep ticking and churning along. Any social process, according to functionalist theories, have intended consequences, and that any values outside the normal and predetermined expectations are considered dysfunctional. So that's the idea why change has to be slow, according to functionalist theory, because if you just put in a new process without, I guess, giving the machine time to warm up to it, they'll consider it dysfunctional and they'll just disregard the change. Transformative change, then lastly here, I think this is just repeating the point above, that it's evolutionary change based, but this point here, transformative change is undesirable as it can cause instability. That's what I was saying. If you put in a cog without the machine, I guess, getting used to it, it can throw the whole thing out. So they don't like transformative change, according to the functionalist theories. Think of it almost like, or another way I visualize it, if you don't like the machine and the cogs, is the human body. This is an example of functionalist theory. The idea that, say, human body is society and culture around the world, and you've got different institutions that help keep the whole machine running. So you can't have one without the other, and vice versa. So you can say, the heart is the family, the education is your intestines, your health system is your bladder, your religion is your brain. So obviously not literally, but the idea is that you can't have a human body that functions without lungs. It just doesn't work. You can't have a human body without a heart. It won't work. Or a brain. It won't work. Or intestines. It won't work. And it'll end up dying. And the idea here is the same with the cogs. You need all these different cogs in place to turn to work effectively together. That's the functionalist idea. So any change that occurs has to be slow and gradual, similar to humans. You can't just, when a baby is born, put a full adult-sized heart into it. The body's going to stress, and again, like the cogs of the machine, it'll break down because that transformative change or that quick change that's happened to society, it doesn't like it and it'll break down. So functionalist theory is all about keeping harmony to remain healthy. So the criticisms of functionalist theory is that its emphasis is actually on stability rather than change. So it's odd to call it a social theory of change when it's more focused on stability than it is change. It explains slow institutional change really well, but it doesn't account for transformative change at all. So according to functionalist theory, any transformative change throws society out of whack and off balance and kills it, when that's not necessarily true. There's been a lot of transformative change over time that's been very beneficial to society to help it keep moving. So that's another criticism. Another criticism is that it doesn't acknowledge the role of the individual and their actions or influences on social change. The focus is purely meso/macro. So the idea is that there's no real, so you can see these tiny little cogs here that sort of stick on the end. Most of the emphasis on change is on the meso and macro institutions, whereas we know that there's been a lot of change over time that's happened because of one individual leading something, or one individual inspiring a lot of other individuals at a micro level to pursue some kind of change. So that's the you can think of any really important, huge person in history that's led significant change just on their own. So that's another criticism of functionalist theory. It also ignores conflict and any negative functions that create social change. So for example, crime, it tends to only look at the good aspects of change. And it also assumes that all members of society consent and cooperate with these changes because they don't believe in any conflict that can create change. Because like we said here, any transformative change, doesn't happen, it breaks the machine. The idea is that it won't work if it's transformative change. The structural changes with society point here. So any change is evolutionary, okay, with functionalist theory. Everything is interrelated, like cogs. That society is made up of all of these different social institutions here that we can see, like family, education, the economic, legal, and religion system, and they all have a single purpose in society. So put that next to here. So all of these cogs, or all of these institutions, have a purpose. They have their own lane, and that helps. They have their own cog, and that helps the big machine and cogs keep turning and churning. So each part is orderly and predictable, so it preserves social stability. This is kind of a nice little summary of the theory, actually. So the needs of society are identified when we're talking about how change occurs, and that determines how the institutions go about satisfying those needs. But of course that assumes that everyone wants the same thing, again, because they're ignoring that there's no such thing as conflict. We put this little cog in here and it'll turn and it'll work even if people don't agree with it. Social change, again, is gradual, it's evolutionary change. And without repeating myself, we'll leave it there. So the direction of change here is linear. So functionalist theory is linear change. When we're looking at the directions, remember, between linear, cyclical, and dialectical. Functionalist change is linear. It goes from point A to B. One, because it's evolutionary change, and there's no sort of cycle of change. They sort of slowly progress and advance as they go. They do accommodate, but it's gradual, calculated, and organized to maintain the balance. So that's why it's linear. If it's cyclical or dialectical, where it's crazy, it'll break the machine and it won't work, or it'll break society and it won't work. So that is functionalist theory. I'll see you in the next one, our last one.